So a little while ago, I made a third-person platformer, and I wanted to go over that, how it works. So first of all, when we hit play here, the actual background goes to, I'm going to pause this and stop maximizing. This level down here, we have the UI all the way up there. The level itself is way down here. So I have this center of level, and it's changing its Y rotation to increase it, and the camera for the title is actually on that facing toward it, and that's how it's rotating around this slowly. So when we hit start, what it's going to do is turn off that camera, and it's going to turn on main camera, which is over here next to our player. Actually, I think I lerped the camera to that position, and when it reached it, I switched it off. I think that's what I did. Now we have the signs here, and the signs actually took a lot more effort than I thought they would. Because I figured I would just make the script when you walk up to it, they turn on when you press E, that'll be it. But then all of the signs turned on when I pressed E. So I needed to make it so that way the signs only turned on if we had been next to them, and there may have been another condition. Let me double check. We should have a script for these signs. You can check it this way. We have the sign script. There it was. So we'll open up that in Visual Studio. Take a quick look at that. So first I had a public string with a text area for the actual message on it. Then I had the interact button object, and that is the object above the player here, which I only made it a object so that way I could replace this at any time if I felt like it. I just didn't get around to making it look better. It is this low quality E, which is fine. It was just a quick project. Then the UI knows about the UI system, so that way you can change this and anything else that was on the UI, being the message box itself and the message inside of it, the text, which is why we needed to use UnityEngine.ui. Then we also needed to know if the player is next to the sign. Starts off, you are not next to any sign, so they're all false. And that also helps here, because if a player is next to a sign, then we're allowed to read it if we press the Fire To button, which I made E, and also, believe, looks like left click. Thought it would have been right click, but Fire To, left click. Not sure if that's default or I changed it, but either way. So then it does the UI read sign, and that means it's in the UI script over here, and in the UI script here we have read sign, and that's going to toggle the info panel, which here turns the debug log on to say toggled in the console, and the info panel is going to turn on. The info panel being this box here. And if we come back down, now that that is on, we are going to set the text inside of there to this new text that we get from the sign script. We are calling it with the message. And then we're telling it the player is next to the sign and what the message is in the debug. As long as we're staying inside of this area around the sign, if we take a look at how the sign works here, there's this big area around the sign. If we're inside of there, we're staying inside of it, we know that the interact object above our head should be on and the player is near the sign. When we exit that, this sign is no longer enabled. And that's going to be the script here. So by disabling the script on the object, if we look at this sign here, this is not on. When we walk up to it, if I can get the right direction, that's when the script turns on. So by turning the script itself on and off, only one of them is active at a time in order to press E or left click in order to turn them on. So that's how I got around the problem of all of them popping up at the same time. Disabling the script itself. This referring to the script itself. So we have these apples around here, and they just have a particle on them. And they have a little collider on them. There is a trigger so it doesn't stop our movement when we walk into it. It plays a sound effect. And the sound effects are really quiet right now. There's also in the options menu here, sliders for the sound effects and the options for the music. Do back and resume. So now we can hear those apples. So the boxes here, we're able to bounce off the top of them, Crash Bandicoot inspired. And the box was something I made, the apples are something else I made. Little particles around them, really simple. And the boxes work by having this collision around it, the solid, and then the top of it is a trigger zone. So it does sometimes when you get really close to it, you can kind of get in the corners and make it do it. I tried to make it so that way it was pretty close, but I didn't want it exact because that would just take it longer, and I wanted to get the project further along. Yeah, so we're able to destroy them. We're also able to kick them by right-clicking. We can do a standing kick if we don't move. If we run and kick at the same time, we do the spinning kick. Both of them attack them the same way. It blows up the crate, and the crates fall down with gravity, as we see the sign says here. This one just tells us if we can pick up the apples. The apples have a counter up here, and we can break more of these. So these ones here are explosive crates that have a countdown when you touch them. And then they explode, and it hurts us. I did originally have a solid collider on them. I believe I changed them in order to make it so that way they wouldn't fall down in the first level. We'll see in a moment. We also have some enemies over here. These enemies, when you kick them, they get destroyed and play a sound effect. If they touch us, we get hurt. We turn red with some invincibility for a little bit. When we're not red, we are able to get hurt again. If we die, we fall over. It calls this animation of the panel fading in, then fading out. So we're able to jump and kick at the same time. These are checkpoints, so depending on which one is active, when you respawn, you'll respawn on that. We see that there is a checkpoint at the beginning. That's why we respawned over there. But now we respawn on the one that's active. And these work by just having a collision on them. And it doesn't matter which one we have, because the player knows which checkpoint they are at. And that's just storing the actual game object so that we can get the position. And this is just a really squished down cylinder with a sphere trigger zone around it. And then the instant kill box over here is just same thing, but it's just when you touch this collision area here. Now we have these green apples over here, and I don't have any more enemies, but these would heal us when we pick it up. We'll see that in the first level. The first level is side-scrolling instead of being forward and back. Kind of tried to get both styles in here. We'll see what I mean by that. So the side-scrolling level, we can press up and down to look, but it's not going to actually move us that way. Left and right will move us. So we can do the level sideways, and the camera's just lerping to our position very slowly. Try to make it so it does follow us, but it's not going to follow exactly where we are, and just have this nice smooth movement around it. We have the exploding bridge here, and if I made it so that way these had the physics on them to fall with gravity, then they would just fall down there and not stay. That's why I turned that off. For the boxes, I made two boxes. One that just is in the air, one that's not. And we get to the end of the level, and we have this portal again, which we saw in the first one, to bring us to the next one. And in this level, it's forward and back. We're able to move all four directions, but we don't have control over the camera. And we can go up here. If we jump up before we destroy too many boxes, there's a bunch of explosives there. I come down here, there's a bridge of explosive ones. We see the checkpoint here. We get a bunch of these guys and they knock us off the platform. You might notice that the movement on the platform is a bit jagged. I did use the character controller for the player here, which I don't plan on using in the future because it was just such a pain to use for this purpose. It's not good for platformers as far as I found. It's a lot better for RTS or like tower defense style games because you're able to tell it to move from a position to another one. It seems a lot better for AI rather than having the actual platformer physics because it has a lot of problems with it as far as making the platformer went. For instance, when I fall off the level, the collision here, what it did was, well, this is pause, I'm going to show you. If it fell off this way, when you reach a certain height in the Y direction and the negatives, I made it so that way it kills the player. So you just lose all of your health. And that's what triggers the respawn. So you hear that the player died, it does the oof sound effect, and then they get put back up there. So what it would do is, it would try to take them and put them through the ground, except it would collide with it. So they would fall again, and if it happened to bring them up fast enough, they would travel through the ground and be put correctly. But sometimes they wouldn't, and it was hard to debug that, because it was really hard to tell what it was doing. I didn't realize that the collision was actually not allowing it to be teleported, essentially, because I was telling it to move to the position, and I was hoping that it would teleport immediately, but it's actually taking the objects in between into account. So using the rigid body and a collider around the player would make it so that way you could just teleport it, just changing the position. I could have changed the position of the object here. I wanted to try to use the character controller as much as possible to kind of get my feet wet with it because I haven't really used it too much. And if we entered this portal, we would just go into the second level first. Yeah, and that's the basics of this entire game here. The player itself has a couple animations on it. It is, if I go to the animator and just make this window bigger, it is not that object. Player model, there we are. So we had, first of all, you start off in idle and you can go into running or back and forth if you stopped. You can die, you can get hit, you can jump, you can do a standing kick, and you can do a spinning kick depending on if you're moving and you were kicking or if you were just kicking. Jumping, if you were falling and you had jumped, it would jump. Hit here is when you got hit, and dying is when you died. And all of these would transition back to idle, because I'm not destroying the player anytime. They're just being moved in their position. So when you lose here, you just get moved back to the beginning of it, back to the checkpoint. And I broke it up into a couple different scripts. You have the player movement. The player movement basically drove the character. If you used an animation, it would use the character's movement here and call the animation script. And the attacks would be called separately. And the attacks and the movement would both use the animator in order to animate the player. And I just was seeing how I could separate out all the different parts there. Because normally I just make a player script that has all of that in it. I'll probably keep doing that from now on. I wanted to see how it would come out if they were all separate objects. The portal script just teleports you to a different room depending on which one you walk into. And it's just using a public string that is in the objects. Let me figure out exactly which one it was. Should be under portals. There. And we have this one here. It should be the actual portal itself. There we are. And we see that it's just a string here that I used in order to change which room we were on based on the build settings of the game, which we see we have test level, level 1, and level 2. What else we have here? The flying enemy. They just patrol back and forth. I believe they're either on a side wave or using an animation. Looks like they are flying enemy. We want to go underneath that to this one. They are on a flying enemy patrol animation, which essentially is just a sine wave. It's a bit more than a sine wave, just a curve in the animation, but similar effect. So they just move back and forth on the z-axis there. I did make it so that way they had a parent, so that way I could rotate that to make them go in different directions. As we saw in level 1 here, they were actually moving on the x-axis, so all I did was rotate their y by negative 90 degrees. To make it so that way the animations were local. And the crates, you bounce off of them by when you touch them. The player knows, and it just sets it to jump. The explosive crates, they have a timer on them. So when the player touches them, counting down is true. When counting down is on, we start the animation. Yeah, right here. We start the animation countdown, and the countdown animation just has it flash faster and faster and faster and faster. Just something I set up inside of Unity. As we see here. So it takes 6 seconds to explode, and we see that it gets faster and faster. When it gets to the end, it calls the explode function. And the explode function just creates the explosion, turns off this object, plays a sound effect, and then it destroys this object when the sound effect is over, so the clip's length. The pause menu is very simple. It's just a bunch of getting the different parts of it. So I'm getting the children objects of the UI here. So we have all the panels, all the menus. The sliders were probably the most work just because of making them attached to the audio. So if I go back to assets here, we have the sound mixer. The sound mixer, if I open up the audio mixer here, we had the master, the sound effects, and the music. Sound effects were all of the sound effects in the game. Music is the music. They were both feeding into master in order to output both at the same time. And by using a percentage of the decibels based on what I decided sounded good, basically negative 80 sounded like it was essentially off. So by using negative 80 to 0, that was my range of the percentage. So if the volume was all the way down, we had this would be 1 to be full. So we would have 0. So that way it does this. And I made it play the sound effect whenever we let go of it, just so we can hear how loud or quiet it is. And it does read in as player preference, so if you do close the game, it will pop up the same way, which we see right here, player preferences. And otherwise, I set it to just be 75% for the sound effects and 50% for the music. Or actually, other way around, 75% for the music. If we press the escape button, it sets the pause menu, and I make sure to lock the cursor inside of the window when it's like that. And if it is, the menu pops up, I show the mouse cursor, which we don't see in the little preview down here, but in the actual game we do. And yeah, the game manager holds most of the objects. The player doesn't actually have the health, the game manager does. The game manager has the health, so that way every object can affect it. The health is, I thought I made it static, but that's fine. So health here, I'm just setting to 100, setting the UI, and I have the apples there. So this is really just controlling everything in the game, from the player's health to the number of apples you have, to which states the UI is in. Didn't really need too much besides that, like updating the health bar, respawning, fading in, things like that. And yeah, this took about 15 hours to do. I did do it a little while ago, so I'm kind of brushing up on it as I go by. But yeah, there's a lot of things in here. Basically a bunch of materials that are just based on colors. Music and other things in the credits there. And yeah, the textures here for the wooden box, because these are ones I just made in Blender. Just use pictures there. And then this is just the same exact picture, except for it's tinted red in Photoshop. Oh yeah, the portals are animated as well. They have that glowing effect to them. So all I did was animate their materials opacity. And I had it go up and down on a sine wave between 0.6 and 0.88. Just like that. So yeah, it was a fun little project to make, and learned a lot more about exactly how to make third-person platformers. I definitely would make this with the rigid body and the collider instead of doing the, what was it called? Character controller. Because you can use either the collision of the collider here in order to detect when we're on the ground, because that was probably the most helpful part of using the character collider, was knowing that we're on the ground. But we can also use raycast to point down, see if we're touching something called ground, things like that. We do need to make sure that the bottom of this is on the ground. Otherwise, you'd hit the top here and we would be able to jump again if we were considering just touching the ground. So there's a couple things to consider. But yeah, other than that, this was a pretty neat project to do. Hope you enjoyed.